Okay, we have 12 cedar pickets and 3 treated 2x6s. Honestly, can't remember how much I used in the last planter, so this is what we're going to use today. I've got the table saw set up, the fence set up at 1.5 inches, so we're going to rip one of those pickets and get some 1.5 inch pieces. Okay, so I actually ripped 2 of those cedar boards, ended up with 6 1.5 inch wide strips, and then I have 2 1 inch wide pieces which we won't be using. So now I'm going to get my miter saw set up and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, next we're going to make 6 24 inch cuts. I'm going to make this first cut, which I've measured, and then I'm going to use that as a template to make the other 5 boards. You're probably going to need at least 2 of these cedar boards to make those cuts. Alright, so I actually ended up using 3 of those cedar pickets to make those 6 24 inch boards. Now I've got one of the pieces that we ripped to 1.5 inches. We're going to cut 4 15.5 inch long boards from this. Okay, so now we're going to assemble one of the sides. So what I've done is I've got a few spare pieces that we didn't use from some of the boards I cut, and I've measured 17 inches on this board here, and that's going to be the height of those side panels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one board and we're going to line it up with this corner here, make sure that's nice and flush, and then we're going to take a second board and then we're going to line it up with that line that I measured. Line it up with the side of the board again. Make sure it's nice and flush. And then we'll add that board in the middle. Now the reason I do this and I don't just cut spacers is because cedar pickets aren't super uniform and don't tend to run in the same width. They're off by anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. So this way I'm getting consistent height on each of my panels and everything lines up well. So I'm gonna just make sure that that's where we want it, and then we're gonna add some of these pieces that we cut. So these are gonna line up with the top here, and then we're gonna take another board, we're gonna lay that sideways, line it up with the edge of these panels, and that will help us figure out where this board is gonna go. So that's going to line up just like that. We will glue those, and then I've got 1 inch brad nails, and then I'll put 2 nails for each board in the back of these to hold them in place. That way I don't have to clamp them, and that'll dry up and it'll be ready to go. Now when you're buying glue, I would recommend getting some of this Type Bond Ultimate wood glue. This is going to be waterproof, which is going to be really important for your planter. I wouldn't use any of the other ones just because that glue isn't going to hold up over time. So we're going to nail these up, and we're going to essentially do the same thing for the long panels as well, but I'll walk you through that whole process. So I'm taking that side piece and I'm actually drawing in a line. I don't know if you can see it, just so that I can line up that board better when I'm gluing it up. Once you've got that one side nailed and glued down, we're going to go to the other side. I like to double check and make sure that everything is still square. If not, I adjust it just a little bit. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did on this other side. We're going to take one of these pieces, lay it sideways, trace it out, and then lay it flat and glue it down and nail it in place. Okay, so you should have your first panel completed. Now the reason that these boards are 15.5 inches and we want the width of that to be 17 inches because we're trying to leave this little gap at the bottom. Now this is where these 2x4s, or the 2x6s that we bought, are going to nestle in into the bottom. So that's why we leave that gap. You can make these as tall as you want. You can put in a second layer. We just want to make sure that we leave that 1.5 inch gap at the bottom to make sure that we have some space for those 2x6s that we're going to install at the end. All right, so I have made 2 of these smaller panels, and now I'm going to work on the 2 longer panels. They're going to be assembled pretty much the same way. We're just going to have some longer cuts. So this one is 66 inches. That's what I'm going to cut it to. And then I'm going to use this one as a template for the other 5 boards. Okay, we've got our 6 boards cut. And again, we're going to cut some of these smaller 1.5 inch wide pieces. This time we're going to cut 6 of those. We're going to put 2 on each end and 1 in the middle. Okay, so we're going to assemble these the same way that we did before. We're going to start off with the 2 end pieces, and then we'll put an extra middle piece for extra support. Okay, so we've got both of the sides on. We're going to put in the middle, and in order to find the direct middle, what I did was I measured from the outside of that board to the outside of that board, which is 65 inches. So the middle should be 32.5. And then, so I mark down on the board, and then I go out 3/4 of an inch, which should be 31 3/4 of an inch, and then go 3/4 of an inch to this side. I should leave it right there. Now the board should lay directly in the middle of those lines. Okay, so that panel should be done. You're going to go ahead and do this all over again for the last panel. Okay, so we should have all of our panels built. We've got 2 long panels and 2 short panels. Now the way that these nestle together is it creates a double lap joint. So essentially this just nestles in right there. We're gonna glue those surfaces, and then we're gonna add deck screws, 2 per each board, going this way into this board. Okay, now everything has been glued and clamped together, and now we are going to add the screws into the side. I have 2-inch exterior deck screws. These are good for outdoor projects, and it's what was on sale at Home Depot. So we're gonna go ahead and put 2 screws per each board into these. I'm gonna drill pilot holes into each of these because these cedar boards will definitely split, and we don't want that. All right, so the panels have now been put together and screwed together. If you wanted to just have your planter box on the ground like this, you don't have to do anything else. You can just fill this with dirt and call it a day. But what we're going to do is we're going to take these 2x6s, we're going to cut them to length, and we're going to attach our bottom. So we're measuring for our 2x6s. So I would recommend measuring for each one of these boards. For this board, we are looking at 22 7/8 inches. So we have our miter saw set up. Super impressed with this tiny little arm thing. But anyways, we're going to cut this board. I'm gonna leave a little bit of extra material and then dial it in slowly just to make sure that we have a perfect fit. Okay, so we have a few options for screwing these bottom pieces in. You could just drill some pilot holes and screw those directly in, but I have this nifty tool that my father-in-law gave me called a Craig jig, which will allow me to make some pocket holes and screw this in. So essentially you just clamp this thing to the end of the board, and then it comes with a special drill bit, and then you slide it in there and drill your pocket holes, and then you're good to go. And it'll create a pocket hole just like that. We're going to use these 3-inch deck screws, which we're just going to put in there and screw to the bottom of the board. Okay, we have our board in place. I like to clamp these down just to make sure that they don't move at all. And we're actually going to go and use these 2-inch deck screws. Those 3-inch ones are a little overkill, but essentially we're just going to screw those in to the side panels. Okay, that board has been attached, and we just rinse and repeat. I would leave maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch spacing in between these boards. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, so we have the basin. We've left some gaps in the bottom for drainage. We're going to end up covering this with some plastic to help the cedar last longer, and then poking some holes in those spots where there's some gaps. But the next step would be to attach some trim to this top. So we're going to start on one side and measure, and then continue to measure all the way around as we go, just to make sure that everything's accurate and fits nicely. Okay, I got this first side cut and pretty much where I want it. So I'm going to glue this down, and then tack it down with 1.5-inch brad nails. All right, so I've tacked down that long side, and now I'm just going to work my way around and attach the rest of the trim. All right, our trim is finished and nailed down and glued down. So the next step is that we're actually going to sand down the corners a little. I'm going to be attaching some aluminum angle iron legs to these, and so these corners can't be that sharp in order for them to fit. So we're just going to round them down slightly, and then we'll get started on the legs. Okay, I've knocked down one of the corners, and again, you just want a little bit so that the angle iron fits snugly against this side of the box. This cedar is super soft, so it shouldn't take more than maybe 30 seconds per corner. All right, next is the legs. So this is aluminum angle iron that I bought from Home Depot. This is a little tag in case you want to buy some for yourself. Now this says it's 48 inches, but it's not quite. It's a little bit over. That actually works in our favor. So I've measured 24 inches from both sides. You can see that those arrows aren't quite aligned, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut right in the middle of those, and this should both equal 2 feet. And I'm going to do that for both of these, and then we're going to spray paint them black, and then we're going to attach them to the planter box. Just a quick note on miter saw blades. I am using a laminate and non-ferrous table saw blade. This is good for any softwood and also aluminum and other laminates. I would recommend getting one of these if you're going to be attaching aluminum legs like I am. Okay, we've got all of our legs cut, and now we're just going to apply some black Rust-Oleum flat protective enamel. These will look really nice, and they'll be protected from the elements. All right, so we've painted our legs, and we have to let these dry before we can attach them. So while we're waiting, we're going to attach the plastic drop cloth to the inside of the planter box. All right, so I've attached the plastic drop cloth to the planter, and I've taken a screwdriver and poked some holes in the bottom to ensure that we get some drainage whenever we water our plants. The plastic drop cloth will help not only hold the soil in, but it'll also help the cedar last a lot longer. Okay, now we're going to attach these legs. I'm going to put a screw here at the bottom, a screw here on the top, and do the same on the sides, making sure I watch out for those screws that we put in originally. All right, so this leg is attached, and we just rinse and repeat for the remaining 3 legs. Once you've got your planter assembled, you can go ahead and put it where you want it. We're going to put ours pretty close to this other one I built. And now we're going to fill it. So we're going to put some all-purpose stone. I've got 3 bags in the bottom of this. And then we've got 7 bags of this raised bed soil. Okay, we've got our crushed rock layer. It's really not that big. It's maybe 1 inch thick. So now we're going to add the soil. Now it's done. It just needs some plants. A couple of quick notes. I actually sunk mine into the ground to try to help this to be as level as possible. You don't have to do that. I've got a lot of clay in my front yard. So they're pretty much bound to sink into the ground anyway. But these obviously would look really pretty if you were to put them on a patio or wherever. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.